Well, welcome everybody to Dig In. I'm Jess Gaedeke, and today I'm joined by someone who really pushes our industry to do better. We at Dig have been so inspired by her work and how she's rallied support around a very important consideration for our industry. So today I'm joined by Claire Ferrari, leader of the Accessible UX research practice at Verizon. So Claire, welcome. Thanks so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, let's start with having you tell us about your background and where you are now.
It's been a bit of a meandering career path, but I started out as an art therapist, and then I went back to school for design, got really into participatory design, which is where I learned a little bit more about disability justice and accessibility design, and that really kind of inspired me to focus a lot of my research on accessibility. And so I started out as a generic UX researcher, but because of my training background in rehab science and design, have always kind of wanted to add in that sort of topic area or expertise into the work that I do. And after a few years at Verizon, I applied for an internal grant and did a couple of projects that incorporated just a kind of expanded recruit, so included participants with different disabilities to kind of prove the value of having a more representative sample of participants. And over the course, I'd say, of a couple of years, and kind of shopping around this notion that there's this huge intersection between accessibility and usability in general. I was given the ability to start a practice that's wholly dedicated to looking at the kind of intersection of accessibility and usability.
That is so cool. And I love the origin and kind of where you started and how, to your point, you meandered through that career path. So, well, we're going to really dig into a lot of that. So let's kind of go there in a moment. But first, I'd love to just throw an impromptu question your way. What is one book that you wish you could read again for the first time?
A classic for me is Design Meets Disability. Like, I read that in undergrad, so like 15 years ago. And I still think about it all the time, especially when I talk to stakeholders about the value of thinking about accessibility, because there seems to be just like this held belief or perceived tension between like good design and accessibility, but that doesn't need to be, and is not the truth. And this book by Graham Poulin kind of dispels that myth that good flashy design can't be accessible.
I love that. I can't wait to read that. Thanks for inspiring me to look at something new. So I can't wait to see that. Speaking of inspiring, our listeners really do crave inspiration from other leaders. And I think one of the best ways to inspire is to tell a story. And you were integral in the development of the Accessible Insights Consortium. So I'd love for you to tell me about how did that idea originate? What inspired it? And really, what does that look like today?
Sure. So again, as I mentioned before, I started out as like a generic UX researcher. And then when I was given the green light to go ahead and build this practice at Verizon that's like dedicated to accessible UX, I found just like a lot of the tools that we use and a lot of the vendors that we work with didn't know a lot about accessibility or had like limited experience in supporting research participation by people with different disabilities. And so, yeah, I think I also recognize like the kind of interdependence that we all have on each other in the research community,
Mhm.
particularly in industry, like, and the reliance we have on platforms and recruiting vendors. So, and knowing that our like house was not completely in order and we need to do better, kind of, rather than making everybody else around us these hard requirements about accessibility compliance, like, kind of like, how can we move through this process and get better together, was the kind of general inspiration behind it. But then I also really got a lot of inspiration from another consortium, which is a group called Teach Access. And I had worked with them a while ago, but they're kind of a different type of consortium that brings together industry partners and higher ed institutions to try to mend the accessible skills gap. So
Mm.
students that are graduating from engineering and design and just all kinds of programs that will land them in product development roles don't graduate with a working knowledge or skills related to accessibility best practices. And so they get into these roles where that's like a requirement, or they're going to need to know about accessibility and product development. Basically, it's a call from industry, and these like big companies are involved: Adobe, Meta, Google, a whole host of these very large tech companies to incentivize higher ed educators to incorporate accessibility in their curriculum.
Hmm. So that's what inspired it. How did you kind of think about bringing that to our industry?
Just again, like thinking about how all of these things are kind of interdependent. Like if industry requires it, then schools will better support it. And
Hmm.
if we know that industry is going, like, it's going to give you a competitive edge, that's like motivating for students. It's just kind of like chicken or the egg, and we need to communicate the need for accessibility on every part of this like interconnected web, which
Hmm.
might be a really silly explanation, but yeah, I think just recognizing that there is everybody has a role to play, and we are better together.
That's a great way to put it. And as you put this consortium together, were there any barriers? Is there any place where you had to kind of change course?
I think the most challenging part was certainly not convincing our leadership, because we have a fabulous leadership team at Verizon in the research org. But I think getting through legal, a lot of the
Mm.
hurdles that surrounded like antitrust, and are we okay like inviting our direct competitors into this group, which I think based on like the ethos of the consortium and getting better together and learning from each other and pushing the industry forward, it's not like a anti-competitive thing. In fact, it's
Hmm.
pretty healthy for us to be working together on accessibility, but just kind of convincing legal counsel that was the case
Yeah,
was challenging.
definitely. What are some of the brands that are part of the consortium?
On the client side, we have Verizon, Nissan, um, Voya Health and Financial, and we also have an accessibility consultancy group called Tamin, and Purina as well. Oh, and sorry, and Fandom, if I did not mention that.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's such a nice diverse group of brands from different industries. And so, how will you know the consortium is a success? What are some of the tangible outcomes or milestones that you guys will measure?
So I think first of all, like a big milestone that we're just coming up on now is the release of a toolkit, which is a work in process, but kind of covers different aspects of the research process, from recruiting and representation to quant and qual design, implementation of research, which includes like how to select a platform and how to understand its support for accessibility if we're doing like remote research or quant. And then also socialization. So we have this toolkit that covers these like big, broad areas in research. And so it's like seen as a starting point. Like we want to actually release this so that we can get input from the broader community to kind of keep evolving it forward. And I'd say like each stage of the evolution of this toolkit, I think, represents a milestone in the, just engaging the community further, and having something like tangible that people can refer to in order to inform their processes and their research practice. So
Hmm.
that's huge. I would see it as a success if we got more platform providers involved. Certainly some of the bigger ones like the survey platform providers and the mixed methods, usability testing, et cetera, kinds of platforms. If we got their kind of like full attention and participation, I think that would be a huge success.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, Dig and Upside, we care a lot about this, so we're doing what we can to make sure that we're as accessible as possible and keep sort of pushing that envelope. I'm curious too, Claire, if you could give an example. Like, I think, the an appreciation for why accessibility matters. Hopefully, most listeners have that. But can you give an example of the actual impact that your work will have? Like, what can brands do better? What will consumers or customers experience differently? Make it real for us.
According to the CDC, about 24% of all adults in the United States have some form of disability. And that's like adults 18 through 65 that are non institutionalized. So that's like the largest minority group that is inclusive of every race, gender, ethnicity. So it is quite a large section of the subgroup of the population, and that they're interacting with our brands and products and services all the time. And so it is really an opportunity to increase the like exposure of our products and services to just a wider audience. It really like making sure that our research instruments are accessible means that they're like less biased. If we're not capturing feedback and information from people with disabilities, like again introducing bias into our work. And also it's a way that the companies that we support can have a competitive edge, and a source of income that is not necessarily being tapped because our research isn't reflecting the needs and desires of this segment of the population.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great example of, there's some economic gain to be had, but at the heart of it, it's about being accessible to more people, and meeting them where they are. So I love that. And what's your biggest takeaway from having created and leading the consortium?
What's amazing is that there are so many, to me at least, so many pockets of people at different companies, whether it's supplier side or client side, of people that are already doing this work and have so much to share, but also like a desire to kind of create this community of practice, and feel connected to a larger group, because I think a lot of us work in silos at the big organizations, big companies that we're at. So there's a lot of passion, and there's a lot that can be learned from people that are working on this in this area already.
Yeah, I think this thinking can be applied to a lot of different considerations, and it's incredible what can happen when brands, join forces. So, congrats to you and to the consortium for your exciting work. And so, if we take that passion and maybe turn it to more you as an industry leader and a leader in your organization, what about accessibility within our discipline, within the market research discipline? What are some of your thoughts or some of the efforts that you've put forth to make our discipline more inclusive?
Yeah, I think that there's underrepresentation of people with disabilities in the research field, and in lots of fields. It's not exclusive to research, but there's a lot of work not that we can do to make our processes and platforms accessible to authors. So there's like the kind of the side which is about like the consumption and respondent side of research, but then on the authoring side, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, to make that like to make sure all the touch points in the research design process are supporting access and use with assistive technologies. One of the most valuable experiences I've had in the last like few years has been a partnership with the American Foundation for the Blind. So I'm very lucky to have at Verizon a disability advisory board, and one of the members is a man named Matthew Janisowskis, and he's the CTO at the American Foundation for the Blind, and he oversees, in large part, this thing called the Talent Lab, which is a kind of teaching hospital model accreditation program that people with and without disabilities can go through, programming to learn all about accessibility in the product development process. And since kind of hooking up with him and kind of trying to come up with ways that we could kind of collaborate, and learn from each other, we established an internship with the AFB's Talent Lab. And so we've had now 2 rounds where we've had, an intern and apprentice join our UX research team. And this is like the fastest, best way to kind of stress test the accessibility of our processes and
Mm-hmm.
platforms, and have, through the great patience and generosity of the interns, learned a lot about what we need to be doing going forward in order to have an authentically inclusive workforce at Verizon, on
Mm-hmm.
especially our research team.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was a very like mutually beneficial engagement, or has been, over the last like 2 rounds, where the interns come in, learn a lot about UX research, conduct a project, um, and then we also learn about ourselves and where we need to strive to be more inclusive.
Is there anything that you can share that you did learn as part of that intern program?
About our own processes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So we learned that in like group style syncs and stand ups, the benefit for everybody when we're showing images in our decks or PowerPoints, the power and benefit of describing that imagery and what we want people to glean from it. What was really cool is when we started doing that, we realized that the people who are joining by phone or have like bad internet connections are able to benefit from those descriptions as well. So
Mm-hmm.
not only was the intern who had a visual impairment able to follow along with the meeting, but so too were people that were phoning in or had bandwidth issues. So that
Mm-hmm.
was like a very important key takeaway, and we've continued that practice
Mm-hmm.
in our meetings.
It's such a great reminder. And, I think I mentioned when we chatted too, I've been really heavy in recruiting lately, and just being mindful of that everyone's coming from a different place, and making sure that, the interview process and the steps that we take is really respectful of all the different, experiences that people have as part of, being a candidate. It's just a place where I've put greater emphasis, and I'm grateful to have had that experience to be able to just kind of think about it differently. How would I approach this conversation if this person is coming from a different place? So I love those examples of things that push us to do better. It's better for the company and for the candidates or the interns in that example. Are there any new tools or technologies or things that are having a really big impact when it comes to accessibility?
Absolutely. I mean, I just the interns just wrapped a project that was looking at AI imbued or AI powered technologies that like support access, and there's a lot of really like game changing applications of AI, specifically like image recognition and generating like descriptions, and like live updating descriptions. Um, there are also a host of like low tech solutions that I've learned about, as part of this, like the consortium, and talking to other researchers that are like really scrappy with their approach to conducting research. So, like, we know that the platforms that support UX research, and specifically like usability testing with prototypes, are not accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, the prototypes are these like flat images with links embedded in them, and they don't behave the way a live application would with assistive technologies. But I've learned from other researchers and adopted this practice myself, is like creating like documents that mimic the hierarchy or the page structure of a live website. So just like using links and headings, and some interesting ways of like mimicking like live website behavior, is just like a Word doc or a Google document can do just fine and get tons of feedback about the intended structure and behavior of web pages. So you can get insights really early on, whereas before it was kind of thought like it's not until much later that you can actually solicit feedback from assistive tech users. So that's a huge one. A really exciting low tech solution that somebody shared with me recently was for card sorting, which is a lot of interfaces use like drag and drop interactions, which, in HCI, there are a lot of drag and drop interfaces and prototypes that can use like arrows and key commands so that they would be accessible. But in our industry, I think these platforms are a little bit further behind. So kind of difficult to do accessibly. But I know somebody that uses Excel spreadsheets and drop down menus to replicate the same like
Yeah.
bucketing exercises that you
Mhm.
would in card sorts. And I think it's brilliant. Very
Yeah.
low tech solution, but like gets that to that like parity that you need to in order to get the feedback.
Hmm. I love that because it's contrast. You've got the, very tech forward AI driven things, but then I love the low tech options as well. What do you think is the ideal future when it comes to accessibility? How would you describe it?
I would hope that in the future, all research incorporates perspectives and feedback from people with disabilities, like regardless of like having a sort of specialized portfolio dedicated to accessible UX research.
Right.
And also that our tools and platforms are born accessible. So we don't have to kind of fight for the platforms that are, very common in our industry to kind of retroactively make the fixes that we need for our participants and our researchers.
Hmm. I love that thought. Born with accessibility. I think that that's a great future state that we should all be shooting for. So let's go to the final dig. This is all about you as an individual, as a person, as a consumer, even. So feel free to take off your Verizon hat if it makes sense. What's the last product or service that you bought on impulse?
Oh my gosh. I am a compulsive consignment buyer, so I
Hmm.
do a lot of shopping on Real Real, and I think I have 600 pairs of shoes.
Very nice. Wow. Where do you keep all of them? No, that's super nice. Um, that's a fun one. So name a category or brand or maybe a product that you could rationalize any price point for. You just have to have it in your life.
It's interesting because I'm like a new categorized money saver. So
Mhm.
I like right now I can't think of anything because I'm trying to save money and maybe own a house one day. Living in New York City, it's like hard to rationalize spending very much money on things that aren't essential or like getting me towards that goal. So
What keeps you inspired at work?
the people I work with, hands
Mhm.
down. And that's like the people on my team, the people that show up to the consortium meetings and like teach me new things, the interns, my teammates, as well as the participants that I speak with. They're like working with research participants on a daily basis that have disabilities is like teaches me so much about technology and teaches me a lot about like perseverance and just people in the world and what they deal with when encountering brands and products and services, and what they need. Just it makes it sort of like really crystallizes and clarifies for me why I do the work that I do and why we should like continually strive for better, more accessible technologies because they make such an impact on people's lives, just on activities of daily living and just, yeah, expanding human abilities.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a great spot to finish because that's a very inspirational and aspirational place that we all want to be. So, thank you so much for sharing your work, Claire. We are lucky, the industry is lucky to have you and Verizon at the forefront of this. So, thanks so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.